All right, in this video, we're going to talk about contracts, a very important part of the auction process, obviously. We're going to get into some best practices, show you some examples and things that you can work off of as well. So let's just jump right into it. And if you remember during our conversations regarding commissions, when you get a signed contract, that's when you're getting paid. You earn your paycheck when the contract is signed. So with that mindset, you know how important this document is for that reason and many others. So I think when you're meeting with sellers, when you're talking with potential consigners, just having that mindset of, I get paid when this contract is signed. You know, technically the funds won't come till later, but it is where you make your money, and negotiating good contracts where you can be profitable is vital. So keep that in mind as we go through this. Some just general tips on contracts themselves. We're going to go through some examples here in a bit. Always have them on hand. You never know when that consignment or auction might come up, so have them available. Best practice, always give a copy to that seller. You could do a carbon copy, you could just do a regular copy, you can email them off. Make sure your seller has that information because they need it. No one understands the terms of your contract, and not just that, but the reasoning behind them. If you can't explain your contract to a seller, you're not going to look like you know what you're doing, and you want to have the confidence to be able to do that. Know who is signing the contract. When you're meeting with sellers, who has the ability to sign the contract? You know, that's step number one. If you're talking to someone who's an assistant or maybe a step lower than who's actually signing the contract, there's a good chance that your message is going to get missed by the time it gets to the decision maker. So know who's signing the contract. Ideally, you're meeting with that person and having discussions with them directly. Who signs the contract? That's who gets paid. So if your contract is signed by the company, you're writing out your check to the company. If it's signed by an individual, you're writing out a check to the individual. We talked about UCC checks and how those play into this as well. But when we were doing auctions, we would make sure that the seller understood that from the beginning. If whoever's signing this contract, that's who the check's getting made out to. And then lastly, title assets. You do have to pay out to the name on the title. And why is that? Because that's ownership. So, you know, if someone's trying to jump title and they want you to pay them directly for a vehicle that their name isn't on, well, guess what? You could be held liable for that. If it's, the original owner comes after you for some reason, you've paid out the wrong person. So title items, just be very aware that you're writing out the check to the name on the title. We've had situations where we've written out 3 checks for the auction because one had one company name, the other had another company name, and then one was in an individual's name. So if they truly, have bank accounts and have ownership of these companies, they should be able to cash those checks. Another great thing to make sure your seller's aware of. Now contracts, as we get into the nitty gritty here. Contracts are required for everything that you sell. The days of the handshake deal are unfortunately over, and it's really the only document that can protect you. It outlines what your seller can expect. It is vital to what we do. We as KBID require it, and the state requires it as well. No matter where you operate, if you're selling on consignment, you need to have the terms written out. So it's not only our requirement, but it's also a legal requirement of you. So key points that we absolutely have to have in any contract that you create is that the agreement is between the affiliate and the seller. KBID is acting as a venue only. So we're not a party to this agreement. It's between your business and the seller. Making that distinction very clear is vital. The seller can never bid on their own assets unless it's rare circumstances where an estate's involved and there's family members that are bidding and actually paying into the estate. That'd be one of the rare examples of when sellers actually could bid on the assets. No removing items once the agreement is signed. That's a huge one, especially in the estate world or even doing on-site auctions at business locations. Making sure that sellers know that once the agreement's signed, you're selling everything that is outlined in that agreement. And if they start pulling items or removing items, well, guess what? You're not getting paid. and now we might have to pull items from the auction, which makes us both look bad. That it's a worst case scenario. So make that very, very clear. And one thing that I would suggest doing when you're working with sellers is you can actually send them a link to the draft auction before it goes live to verify that everything in there is being sold. So, they can give you a go ahead after they've seen the draft auction before it's live. And at that point, there's no turning back. Penalties for, if they're breaking the terms of the contract, and reserve not met fees, those should be in there for sure. If you're utilizing a reserve, always, always, always charge for that service. It's not free. And, on the rare cases where you do take a reserve, make sure that you're paid appropriately. And then lastly, best practice, always itemize the list of the most valuable assets. So, like we talked about before, removing items from an auction. If you're contracted to sell a pole barn full of tools, but you also have a skid steer and a tractor, you get there, you've agreed to the terms at 20% or 15%, whatever it is, and now the skid steer's gone. Well, that has drastically changed the terms of this auction and how much you're going to be paid. So making sure that those most valuable items are listed on your contract is very important as a coverage for you. And if that does happen to you, at that point, you're either renegotiating the terms or you're walking away, would be my recommendation. So those are just some few tips that we have. What I want to do now is go through some actual contracts that we've created for you. And these are available in the knowledge base. This one itself has the verbiage in there as well. The blue ink here has some explanations from us. So this is more of a training document, but you can take this and use it. You can add your logo to it, your name, obviously, all that information that you need. This is very, it's a longer contract, but it covers a lot of things that we've seen over the years. And we don't throw things in contracts just for fun. There's a horror story behind every line in here. Disclaimer though, this was not written by a lawyer. So our recommendation to you is to, once you have your contract written up, maybe you've taken a lot of the ideas that we put together here, have that approved and looked at by a lawyer, in your area, who knows your local laws, who knows business in your area, to just verify and say that you're good to go and that you're covered and where you need to be covered. So we're not going to go through this line by line. I want you to go to the knowledge base. We'll link that on this page and do that. But I will go through some, just some bullet points so we can explain what it all means. At the top, I said we're always paying out who is signing the contract. Make sure to make that distinction here on the top. This top line verifies, what the relationship is. You're selling between XYZ affiliate and the seller. This first line, and we've actually included initials on each one, which helps make it easier to explain to a seller when you're going line by line why they're verifying each one. So the first one is, very important when we talked about the UCCs and ownership and who owns what. They're verifying they are the legal owner, they have the right to sell, and they have the right to receive all proceeds from that auction. Next, they understand that assets will sell when the auction is closed unless a reserve has been agreed upon. So basically, it's saying items are going to sell to the highest bidder unless a reserve is agreed upon prior to the auction starting. The last thing you want is an auction to start, and now your seller is saying, hey, I need reserves on these 10 items. Well, that is a conversation you needed to have 3 weeks ago, and be very clear about what's going to happen. If it's truly worth $5,000, it's not going to sell for $50. So, and your seller may be freaking out on the third day of the auction because, bidding's low, and that's what happens in an online auction. It takes a while to get to that progression to the last day and last hours. Starting bid for all lots is $5. So we have the ability to start the bidding at $5 or $1,000. We have those locked in, and the reason that we do is we just want to make it consistent. We've seen when we had that open before, some people would start utilizing a starting bid at $20, $30, $50, all within the same auction. Basically became a buy it now platform, kind of like eBay. So we really wanted to tone that back and make sure that we're consistent. We're starting it at $5. We're selling it to the highest bidder. That's what our buyers come to expect, and that's what they like. And so that's why we've locked that in. Affiliates will determine how to present the assets, the consigned assets, to bidders. You are the expert. Do not rely on your seller to tell you how to list your items. I mean, they can give you information on stuff that you don't have intimate knowledge on, but you don't want them dictating how you list items, because you might have to lot 10 of these collectible items together in order to make a lot worth 25, 35 bucks. Your seller most likely is wanting you to sell every single one of those lots individually. And now if you're hoping that half of them get a $5 bid, you've just added way more labor to your process, and you're not going to be paid nearly enough. You know, you're hurting your profitability right there. So your seller is understanding that you're the one who's making that decision on how items are disclosed. Next, consigned assets are undamaged, fully operational, and without defect. So this is just a coverage for you as the affiliate. It's assumed everything we're selling is in working condition, unless noted otherwise. So you're going to want to be testing everything. We'll talk about that in future videos. But the last thing you want is a dishonest seller who's trying to put lipstick on a pig and sell it through you, because you're the one that has to answer to that. And that's your brand on the line. That's our brand on the line. It's not a good thing. So making sure that they understand, they need to let you know what those issues are, what the defects are, because otherwise it's just going to create a ton of problems. And you can actually charge a fee if they're selling inaccurate items and they didn't give you complete information on every asset in the auction. The next one is huge. We talked about it. Sellers prohibited from removing assets from the auction. Now, this is one where you will definitely want to charge a fee if that happens, because you've already taken the time to catalog and to write up the description. I know some affiliates charge up to $50 per lot. You know, that's going to be a big hit to the pocketbook. So I think it's effective. And just knowing that, you know, that removing items from an auction is our last resort. We never want to do it. We all look bad when that happens. The seller needs to understand what the penalties are going to be if that's the case. And again, that's why I recommend sending a draft auction out to sellers prior to the auction going live, letting them see, you know, what it looks like and giving you the last go ahead. Sellers prohibited from bidding on their own assets, shill bidding. It's not only illegal, it's unethical. We have strict policies against it. You should be watching for this. We actually even have a spot here if they have a bidder number to put that in there. What are the fees? Make those fees hurt. I've seen, you know, if they end up winning 10 items on an auction, I've seen some people charge up to 50% commission rate. And, you know, if there's, you know, a fake account, which is very difficult to make with the fraud detection that we have in place, or a brother or someone else who's bidding with the intent to drive up price. We need to know about that, and we need to stop it as soon as possible. The unfortunate reality is we've had to pull auctions before because this was happening. We've had to halt the entire thing and tell the seller, hey, you know what, we're done here. This is not how we do business. And you know, we would stand behind you if that was the case and we found out that this was happening. You know, our reputation and the trust from bidders is more important than this one sale for this auction seller who thinks he or she can just bid up the auction and do as they please. So again, these are not bullet points that you can really kind of skimp over when you're talking with the seller. You do need to explain each one and the reasoning behind it. Assets aren't sold until the affiliate receives payment. So just because that item sold for $5,000 in the auction, if the unfortunate reality that a buyer doesn't show up or you know, doesn't perform, you don't have to pay your seller for that. You can relist it in a future auction. The bottom line is here, you're not paying the seller unless you're paid for the assets sold. We've had some weird situations where a guy brought in a gun, had his buddy bid it up to $5,000, which is way over market value, came in the next day and says, hey, where's my check? Well, that's not how this works. You know, we need to be paid in order to pay out our seller. And then having an understanding of what happens if it doesn't sell. What if there's a no-show? Do you have the ability to negotiate with the backup bidder? And usually what I would do in those cases, say it's a $5,000 item, you have a backup bidder at $4,800, call your seller, say, hey, this is what happened. I'm going to go offer it to this guy. I need this in writing saying that I can do this, and let's get it sold for you. That happens, unfortunately, but it works a good percentage of the time if you're still trying to get it moved, because that backup bidder probably still has interest. When can your seller expect to be paid? That's all outlined here. We have the settlement process. When can they get the settlement showing what's sold? All of those things are listed here. Reserves. There's a lot here on reserves, and it's mainly for you as the affiliate as well as your seller, understanding the impact of reserves, that they have to be disclosed, that they're agreed upon before the auction goes live. You need to put them into the system before the auction goes live. That reserves can be lowered during the auction, but they can never be increased. A request to lower reserve should always be made in writing. And on auction day, on auction close day, if you have a reserve or two in your auction, that is the time that you start talking with your seller. If your reserve is $7,000 and bidding's at $5,500, I would be doing as much as I could to lower that reserve right now to that price, because we don't want to cut out those buyers who are going to be there in the last hours. And that's when, if we're able to lower that reserve to the current bid price of $5,500, now it's back open to an absolute auction, basically, where the highest bidder is going to get it. And that's what we want. So explaining that to your seller, letting them know, when they signed the contract 3 weeks ago, $7,000 sounded good, but $5,500 is still acceptable to them. Now you're able to get that item sold as well. What those fees are for items that don't meet reserve. Like I said, always, always, always charge for reserves if you're utilizing them. And we have it broken in here into titled and non-titled items. And the reason that we do that is here in Minnesota, we can act as a dealer for affiliates. And if you're using us, we do charge a $79 doc admin fee for reserve not met. So that's why we've broken it into two sections here. Lastly here, it does get into that titled registered assets. When you're signing the contract, that is when you need to get your hands on the titles. Do not wait until after you've done the work on the auction, because I can guarantee you there's going to be some kind of paperwork that isn't there. It happens time and time again, unless you have a really particular seller who's on top of things. Usually the promise of, hey, I have all the paperwork back in my office, doesn't work out that way. So make sure, even when you're talking beforehand and you're doing the sales call, start getting that in their head. Hey, I need all the paperwork. I need the title work for these 5 vehicles, for the trailers, for all the things that you're selling in the auction, and make sure that you have it at the time that you sign your contract. And with that, any lien releases must be accompanied as well. And then this last section is just breaking down your commission and fees. You can make this, format this any way you'd like. Some would have standard commission rate. Some might have commission rate by price, by sold price. Others will have additional fees, setup fees, marketing fees. I would probably add a little bit more formatting to this form to show what those other fees are, and say, hey, even if you're not charging a setup fee, showing them, hey, this is typically where we charge our sellers. I'm not going to charge you this time. It's just a little more incentive and making them feel like they're getting a good deal. And then lastly, that's where we sign. You might have multiple sellers where they need to put their signatures, and yours as well. And like I said before, in the best practices, make sure that you're sending a copy of this to your seller as well. They need to see it, have it available so they can reference it if there are any issues. And like I said, this is all available in the knowledge base. We're going to share a link with you. I do have one more I want to show you. It's a short form contract. So sometimes it might be just a single item, or if you're working in a warehouse and you're just taking individual consignments in, if it's a single item and you don't need a 4-page contract. This is a simple one made. It just has all the pertinent information, what they're going to pay. If there's a minimum charge on that, their name, their address, phone number, date can sign, items, issues, defects. And then down here it has those things that we require you to have. Items are being sold without reserve, and I will not bid on my own items. I tested I'm the rightful owner. The consigned items, I further agree. The event that I become the high bidder on any of my items, I will pay the full amount, as well as a commission rate of 30% and $25 lot fee. I understand the auction proceeds are generally distributed X amount of days following the sale. A buyer's premium will be charged and collected on behalf of the auction venue, kbid.com. And KBID is acting as a venue only and is not a party to this agreement. Now, again, those are all the important points that you need to make sure you have in your contract. This, again, is not written by a lawyer or reviewed by a lawyer, but it's the simple version of what we went through before. It doesn't have all the explanations and everything that you may need, but it's nice to have something simple like this on hand as well. Maybe you can take this and make it into your own as well. So, like I said, this is all available in our knowledge base, and we will share that with you. Take a look at it, learn it, know why certain things are in there. Read the blueprint on the sample contract that we have. Ask us questions if you do have them. And then lastly, make sure that you're getting it verified by your own legal team or your lawyer to verify that you're covered, because we can't provide you with a legal document just due to liability for that, but we can give you some best practices and a starting point. So we hope this is helpful, and we'll see you again soon.